Switching over. Hi, how's it going, everybody? This is Greg Brown from Foundry. And as you can see from the beginning of this live stream, we have a whole new process in place for these live streams. And these are how these are going to be managed going forward. So I wanted to say thank you to Nicole Wrench, who's put this all together for us. And it's basically our producer behind the scenes, setting everything up, organizing everything, and actually managing the stream itself. So thank you so much, Nicole. And you'll probably hear her chime in later when she asks questions for you, right? So first off, we want to have a couple updates for you about Moto, what to expect for the rest of the year. And also, we want to hop on over to a few small announcements, some cool things I've seen Moto related on the web, but very short, just a couple of them, because we have an excellent demo from Leonard Billeke, who I apparently I'm incapable of pronouncing his name, because when I was like, did I say it right? He's like, meh, sort of. But that is the nature of how I pronounce names, I guess. And so we'll show some of the work that he's been doing between Storm and Moto, and then we'll hop on for a quick interview so we can know a little bit more about Leonard, and then he'll show us a 40-minute demo of how he uses Storm and Moto together, which I'm really looking forward to, because I want our content to be more focused towards things that are of real value to you, not just, oh, look at this cool image, but here's how to make this cool image. And Leonard's put together a fantastic presentation. So I'm really looking forward to that. So first off, updates. Last update that we've released was 16.1 V8. We are going to be releasing a 16.1 V9, and so that should happen in coming weeks. And so you can expect to see that land pretty soon. Around the same time as that, so sometime in November-ish is when we're going to start opening up the public beta for Moto 17.0. So that public beta is restricted to anybody who has a current license for Moto, but it will be in your hands, in around the middle of November, and we're kind of targeting a release date for 17.0 around the middle of January. So just to set some expectations for you guys. So really quickly, let's just hop on over to take a look at a few of the things around the web that I think are worth pointing out. First off, Kimo Hellstrom. We talked about him all the time on the live streams, right? He does amazing work, and he has very recently started up a whole new stream that is really, really interesting. And so if I come over here and take a look at modeling and rendering a cola, this is a very detailed plant. And so what he's doing is he's zooming into a very small area of a plant, and it's almost like an alien landscape. And so I love Kimo's work because of his attention to detail, and for him to take on a project like this for a client, I mean, that's the type of thing I don't think I would try and do in 3D. And he has a 3-hour live stream that he did yesterday, and you can hop on to his channel here and watch as he works on really interesting, challenging projects like this. And also another user you guys have heard a lot about in recent months is Jan. Jan has been doing time-lapse videos. They're not live streams, but spaceship modeling time-lapse 1, 2, 3, and 4. And these are just wonderful. And of course, it's going to give me an ad first. So I'll go ahead and let that move on through. But just, very straightforward time-lapse modeling sessions showing how he models from image reference. And so if you want to understand how someone like Jan produces just amazing, amazing models like, the Wart Jeep, which many of you are familiar with, Jan's willing to walk you through that on new projects. So check out his time-lapse recordings and give him some feedback, and, benefit from all the great knowledge that Jan is willing to share. I'm definitely trying to glean as many little bits and bobs as I possibly can. Alrighty. So again, not a whole lot of updates today, not a whole lot of things to show, but we want to get this new live stream format in order more than anything else. And so next up, what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at what Leonard is going to show us in his demo, and then we'll be hopping into a little interview with him. So with that, let's take a look at some of Leonard's Storm or animations from Storm rendered in Moto.
Hi there. First of all, I want to show you the Storm website, where you can find a lot of useful information and setups and a demo you can download and try out, or some sample caches you can try to open in Modo for yourself. And of course, at the bottom you can buy a license. At first, I want to show you the Learn section. There's a quick start guide with basic stuff, a link to our Discord server, YouTube tutorials, a lot of random setups you can download, and the docs. And we start with the docs, which is under construction right now, but the expressions section is quite complete. So if you want to know which particle expression you can use in your scenes, just have a look here. And there is other interesting stuff too, like internal functions. For example, the length function I use in the tutorial later. And please don't be afraid, you don't have to use them. You can do a lot in Storm without the expressions, but if you want to go further, you can use them. Let's jump over to the random setups page. Here you can find ready-to-use setups you can download. You can download the scene files, and this one I'll show you later, how to import the cache in Modo. And there are a lot of them. You can filter them by skill level or topic. There's also a search function. A lot of interesting stuff, I think. So let's have a look at some advanced setups. These ones often combine multiple solvers like smoke and cloth in this case, or other ones. Here you have a sewing sim or a spray can or some wool which got ripped apart. And also a condensation setup. This one is very useful, I think. And you don't have to understand the setup at all. You can just throw in your geometry and hit simulate. These setups are, of course, inspired by the Modo random setups. But I asked Dino Sanko for permission. I hope he's well. You can also choose a topic like the push apart node, which pushes particles apart by their size, including this one, which is inspired by an Entecma video. Okay, now we are in Modo and we can load a sample cache. This one is from the tutorial, the flower, and you can see the particles are loading just fine. One disclaimer, I rendered them in Octane and used a proxy for this because it's a bit complicated to get motion blur in Octane in Modo with particles. And also a lot of them are going to slow down Modo by a lot if you use the replicator to put little spheres on them. Next we have this little parachute. One disclaimer, again, it looks like the box is a rigid body. It's not, it's a very stiff soft body. There are no rigid bodies in Storm. What's cool about that, I think, is that you import the caches in Modo and it will load basic geometry and put a deformer on top where all the simulation is stored. So you can modify the basic geometry and correct for small errors, or in this case here's a gap between the curves and the cloth, and you can just correct that and enable the deformer again and it will be fine. One thing I have to add is that Storm's cloth solver currently does only support particle-based self-collision, so you need evenly distributed geometry for that to work, but that will be hopefully addressed in the future. Next one is a shrink wrap simulation. And here's the same. We got a base geometry and the deformer on top. And so we can modify this geometry, we can apply materials, switch to subdivision surfaces, and also can add operations on top, like thicken the geometry. I use polygon bevel for this because you can add some segments, and here is the result. Next one, for the next one, I prepared 4 different caches, and as I was recording, I thought it would be easier to combine that in one file. And you can do that with Storm. Just use a few merge nodes. You can transform the cache and just write that into a new file. And now we have a single file we can just open, and we get 2 layers. One is the mesh, and one is containing the curves. And you can see it plays just nicely. And here you can see the curves. They are all simulated curves, which are connected by constraints to the soft body. And when the force is high enough, they are breaking apart and flying away. And the force is a simulated smoke sim. So this is quite an advanced setup, I think, but the result is quite pleasing. Also, you can use the render curves feature in Modo, and this will render with motion blur, but there's a little bug. You can't do that in Octane, so I used a workaround for that as well, and just load them as proxies. And here's the result.
Well, welcome, Leonard. That preview video was fantastic. You spent a lot of effort putting together the demo that everybody's going to see, after our interview here. But then you also threw that together for us really quickly. Really appreciate you putting this all together, because those are extraordinary examples.
Thank you.
No,
good to be here.
Oh, great. Well, I mean, what I've been impressed by with your Storm demos, and of course, just for those who don't know, Storm is a simulation tool that can be used alongside Modo to bring in simulation information and render it in Modo. And you rendered it using Octane in Modo. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes.
Fantastic. What was your experience like using Octane in Modo? Because you're basically using 2 external tools along with Modo. How was your experience there? Bringing in simulation data using VDBs and then rendering that out on Octane.
That works very, very well. I tend to leave all the data outside Modo and just use Modo for setting up the scene, lighting, and making the materials and these kind of stuff. But let Octane do its thing, and let Storm do its thing.
That's a good way to put it. I'm not very familiar with Storm, but I am with Octane, and you kind of just let Octane do its thing, and it does it extremely fast. So very cool that you were using both these external tools along with Modo. All right, so with the simulations you showed, I was kind of surprised by them because of how convincing the topics, the subjects were. You usually feel like, especially with oh man, I'm totally blanking what they're called, but the plant where you're blowing off the pistols or something like that off the top, oftentimes the weight feels wrong, and the weight felt so right in your simulations. And that was true with the parachute. That's also true with the one that actually personally impressed me the most, the flower, because flower to me seems like something extremely hard to simulate because it has a stickiness, but also a powderiness, and your simulation captured that so well. So how much of that is your skill as an artist, and how much of that is the ease of using Storm?
I think it's very easy to do in Storm. I have to admit, I have a very good contact to Sebastian, who created the software, and he just gave me some tips to enhance it some more. As you can see in the tutorial later, it's not that hard to get a convincing result out of Storm.
Very impressive. All right, very, very nice. And as was mentioned in the video, these files are available for download. So anybody out there can download these and check them out and kind of start getting, start being able to understand how to leverage these tools, right? So tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get involved in 3D, and how did you have you gravitated towards simulation? Is this one of your strengths? Tell us a little bit about yourself and your experience in 3D.
Okay, yeah. After I graduated from high school, I began an apprenticeship in a photo studio. So they were specialized in liquids, beer stuff, but also product photography. And around 2009, 2010, I heard about this new technique called CGI. And I thought, man, I have to learn that. And there weren't many places you can learn that in Germany at the time. And one was in Nuremberg, the University of Applied Science. And yeah, I went there to study CGI and met there Felix Reichert, who went there to study film. And we made some short movies together. And after graduation there, we founded quadratkollektiv, the film production company and 3D studio. We are working ever since.
That's amazing. So you got out of school and you started a studio.
After studying design, yes.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like oftentimes people move on, to like another studio. They kind of decide, hey, we should do our own thing. But you came right out of school. You had this kind of strong, like, I guess, sort of a computer science background about simulation, and that kind of helped you.
No background about simulation at all.
Just your practical experience dealing with fluids and stuff like that. That was your primary skill set originally.
Maybe. To be honest, I found out about Storm like 3 years ago and didn't do many simulations before that. But I think there was one project we needed simulated grains, and someone posted about Storm on the Modo forum, and I got a license and immediately fall in love with the program. So that's how I came to doing simulations.
Beautiful. All right. So when did you start using Modo, and what attracted you specifically to Modo?
I started around 2012 or something. As a student, we could choose our tools, but there were some recommendations. So we were told, if you want to work in a big studio with a production pipeline, learn Maya. But if you want to have fun, learn Modo. And so I choose that, and I don't regret it.
I think we should probably make that a tagline. If you want to enjoy your life, use Modo. So that's pretty awesome, man. Okay, very cool. So yeah, so like what kind of projects do you gravitate towards industry wise? Are they like internal corporate projects? Are they like film or commercials? Like what do you end up doing most of?
Yeah, I think commercials, and we like to tell stories. That's our main goal, and there are many ways to do that. So
So the projects you're the Quadro Collective?
Yeah, quadratkollektiv.
Quadrat Collective. The project the Quadrat Collective takes on, or you try and take on projects that give you an opportunity to tell a story.
Yes.
So you guys actually also art direct any sort of commercials?
Yes, we also we love to do that, but if anyone comes around with a good idea, we do that as well.
It sounds like you're living the dream. You kind of sound like Rich Huri in a way of trying to find ways to lead a satisfying life as an artist, where of course you're going to take on projects that are like, I need you to make these 5 whiskey bottles with this lighting setup. That's
Um,
making the money. But
we do that too.
yeah, but exactly. It brings in the money. But at the same time, your ultimate goal is how can we, have a business that allows us to start trying to tell stories? Like, do you have any elevated goals as far as that's concerned? Like, I mean, if you want to tell stories, you're telling them in your commercial projects, but any sort of short films or anything like that?
We always tell us we want to do that at some point because we did that back in university.
Yeah.
And it was a great experience. We had a lot of fun, but yeah, it's hard to get that into the schedule.
The way it always works, but it impresses me that you even found a way to start taking steps towards that. And it reminds me quite a bit of Rich Hurry. All right. Well, man, I can't thank you enough for putting together this amazing demo that we're about to watch and that preview video that we just watched before. And so just to let everybody know, we're going to now switch on over to the demo portion from Leonard, and then we'll come back at the end of that and we'll hold a quick Q&A at the end for any questions you have for Leonard or myself. So thank you so much for hopping on with us. It is late for you right now, so we really appreciate it. And we'll be back in about approximately 40 minutes or so, right, for QA.
Hello and welcome to this tutorial. I'll show you how to do this particle and smoke simulation in Storm and Modo and render it in Octane for Modo. We start in a new scene in Storm. In the middle you can see the viewport where everything takes place. On the left you can see an item or object list, and on the right there are parameters of the current selected object. Under that there is a procedurals panel, which we don't need right now. And at the bottom there is a timeline and some buttons to start and stop the simulation or view your caches. At first we use the general settings to set up the time range to 150. Frame rate of 24 is fine, and all the other settings are fine as well. In the next step, we create a granular system. We do that by clicking on Add Object, Add Granular System. On the right side, you can see all the settings of the system, but we can leave them at their default values. Now we add a source, which is by default a simple plane. We can move it by pressing W or insert numerical values to the translation channels. When we now press the Sim button, the simulation starts and a lot of particles are being emitted. To make this more interesting, we can shift-click on the Change Geo button to load one of the sample meshes to emit from a volume. I really like this rock mesh because it produces a nice organic emission. At the moment, the particles are just falling down and are emitted on every frame. We want something different, and that is to emit once on the first frame and shoot the particles in an arc to the right. To do that, we click on the source and set the direction values to 5 on X and to 0 on Y. In addition, we can use the single shot frame channel to choose a frame on which a single emission should happen. We type in 0 to emit on the first frame. When we now hit the Sim button again, we can see that we succeeded. The particles are emitted once and are flying in an arc to the right. Next, we increase the resolution to 20 and try how that looks. We can see that there are a lot more particles now, and it looks already quite nice. But there are still a few problems. The chunks at the end of the sim are too big and the particles do not separate at the beginning of the sim. Before we solve this, we can activate one of Storm's performance features, sleeping. This sets particles to sleep if they are not moving anymore and therefore don't need further calculations. As you can see in a moment, these particles are turning red. Okay, to break our particles apart, we can use a force. By default, this is limited by a box, so only particles inside this area are affected. We can change its shape to sphere and scale it until it fits to our emitter. This way, the force will only affect the particles at the beginning of the sim. Again, we can type in values in the transformed channels, but if we press R in the viewport, we can also use these handles. At the moment, the force is directional and points downwards. We need something else. In the options, we can set the force to radial, so the force pushes the particles to all sides. In addition, we add some noise to make the result a bit more random. When we now hit the sim button, the force does not seem to work. That is because another feature of Storm is on by default. This one affects small chunks of particles more than big ones. We set the limit for big chunks way up, and now our force starts to work. Maybe a bit too strong. So we decrease the strength by a lot. To find the best values, we have to try a few times. Maybe it's still a bit strong, but all in all, I think this is a good result. At this point, I increase the resolution again. Maybe 50 is a good value. As you can see, the force is again way too strong here, so I set it to a smaller value. And the noise too. And now we start the simulation again and have a look what's happening. Nice, we can see how the particles are breaking to smaller chunks and does nicely. There's one thing left we can add to improve the sim even more. At the moment, all particles have the same speed. It would be cool if the smaller ones would slow down a bit faster than the bigger chunks. This can be achieved by another force. We can change the name to drag so we know which is which. At first we set it to unbound so it's affecting the whole scene. Next we enable wind. We set the strength to a very small value and the speed to 0. Now we scroll down to the clump size feature. I think I increase the value for small chunks a bit. Now there should be a gradient controlling the strength of the force by the size of the particle chunks. And when we now start the simulation, we should see that those smaller particles fall down slower than the bigger ones. And as you can see, I didn't record that, so you have to believe me. Now we are nearly finished. In the last step, we cache the simulation to the disk. To do this, we can open the preferences and click this checkbox. We can click the other one as well to write a play blast to see how the simulation looks. Now we have to save the scene file. Start the simulation and wait until it's ready. The basic grain sim is now ready, but we need to enhance it. For this we open a new scene, dial in the same settings as before and head over to the procedurals area. By hitting R, we can create a read node. Shift-click on the file path opens a browser window where we can load our cache. Okay, there it is. As you can see, there are already a lot of fine particles. But since we are looking for a very fine flower-like look, we need even more. To do this, we can use the upres solver. As a first step, we need to generate more particles. This is done with an upres node. This one generates particles around each particle of the source sim. Then we need the solver itself. Now we plug the upres particles into the solver node and also the original sim as a driver in the other slot. We can leave all values at default and are more or less ready to simulate. One important step is to add an end dynamic node. If we had another collider in our scene, we had to plug this in between the two nodes. Now we add a set attribute node. This node can create or alter particle attributes. We need this to give the particles a width attribute, which Octane uses later for the particle sizes. For this, we set the node to scalar. We could set this to a fixed value like 0.005, but we want to introduce some variation. So we use a random function for this. So we type rand at petinum in brackets, which gives us a random value between 0 and 1 based on the index of each particle. In addition, we can name the node so we know what it's doing. So to remap these values, we type in remap right before the rand function. We know this returns values between 0 and 1, and we want to remap these to very small values like 0.0075 and 0.004. Then we just add a write node by pressing W. We want to write the particles in a single stitched Alembic file, so we enable this option and remove the hashes from the file name. Now we just save the scene and start the simulation. It looks like nothing is happening, but Storm is connecting the 1.5 million uprest particles to the 300,000 driver particles. This takes a while, but when it's done, the simulation is really fast. Here's the play blast. Again, we start a new scene and dial the settings in to match the other scenes. This time we are going to use the node graph again and need to activate the Geo Attributes panel. In the general settings, we set the min and max substeps to 2 and enable run procedurals on subframes. Now we move the cursor to the procedurals area and press R to load the original particle cache. Now we want to emit smoke from the particles. But before we can do that, we need to filter the particles to get a nice emission. For this we use a delete node. By activating a node, we can see the particle attributes in the attributes panel. Here's the color, the position at the time of emission, IDs, velocity, and particle width. And now we can find some rules to filter the cache. In the delete node, we can see there is an add in the enabled channel. This means that we can use particle attributes here. So we want to delete slow particles and only want to keep the fast ones. So we type in length at v in brackets is smaller than 1.5. When we now activate this, we can see that the particles are getting deleted when they hit the ground and slow down. So now we got rid of the particles lying on the floor, but there are still a lot of particles left. We need to thin out this particle cloud. We can do this with another delete node. Now we generate a random value per particle again with the rand function and test if this value is smaller than 0.95. If this is true, the particles get deleted and we should end with only 5% of the particles. Now we add a noise node to introduce some randomness. We only want to add noise to the velocity of the particles, so we disabled effect positions in the noise options. Next, we add a trail node. So what is a trail node for? We can see that if we turn the particles into volumes by hitting the P key. I just remove the trail node to show you the difference. As you can see, we have single points which would lead to spotty emission in the smoke sim. The trail node fixes this by adding in-between particles which produce a way nicer emission. The trail node copies multiple frames in one frame, and we can also use substeps for this. So as a last thing, we change the volume type to fog, which produces nicer results in my opinion. Now our smoke emitter is ready to go. But this is not the whole sim yet. For this we click on Add Object and Add Basic Smoke Graph. This creates a preset smoke sim we can use as a starting point. If we now hit the sim button, we can see that the simulation is working. The sim uses a cube for the emission, which got also a transform node and a mesh to volume node to turn it into a volume. We can just delete this part and replace it with our particles. In the smoke origin node we can change some basic settings. A bit more substeps, and we don't need to simulate heat. In my opinion, this can look nice even if there is no heat in reality, but for now we leave it off. In the smoke emitter node we can also set the heat to 0 and reduce the velocity and set the velocity mode to add. Now we switch to the solver and boost the vorticity and also add a bit velocity diffuse to make the smoke a bit smoother. So after activating the last node of the chain, we are ready to start the simulation. But first we need to save the scene. So now we hit sim and can immediately see our smoke appear. Now we can also turn on the read node from the top of the chain to also see the particles. The last thing missing is another write node to cache our sim to disk. Again, we press W with the mouse in the procedurals panel to create a write node. This time we don't want to write Alembic files, so we type in VDB instead. By default, this node will write the cache in the same folder as the scene file, and I think that's quite convenient. So, the simulation is running and I noticed that I forgot something. As you can see, the smoke is expanding below the ground plane. This is because smoke sims need a collider for this in Storm. We can fix that quite easily by pressing R to summon a read node with a cube mesh, T to add a transform node to scale the cube and bring it to the right position. Next, we hit M to convert the mesh into a volume and plug it into the solver. Now we can clean things up a bit. By the way, I really like this feature, which moves all the nodes up the chain by pressing Ctrl or Command. So now everything should work just fine. Here's again the playblast. So again we start in a fresh new scene and again make our basic settings. This time we set the sub-steps to 2 and enable run procedurals on subframes as well. Now we load our smoke cache by hitting R and shift-clicking on the file path channel. We can change the name of the node at this point for better orientation later. Now we add another read node and load the first frame of our original grain sim. Storm asks if we want to load this as a sequence. No, we only need the first frame. Now you can see we have all the particles, but they are static. To make them dynamic, we add a make dynamic node. If we now start the simulation, the particles are flying away dynamically. To make them follow the smoke, we need a sample volume node. This will sample the velocity of the smoke on every particle's position and write that into the particle's velocity. There are a few options to choose from. We want the value to be set, and this should not be limited to particles inside the volume. Now we save the scene and have a look how our sim looks like. As you can see, the particles are now following the smoke. At some point the smoke will fade away, and I think it would be cool if the particles would vanish as well. To do that, we add another sample volume node. This time we want to sample the density of the smoke. You can check the values in the Geo Attributes panel. Now we add a delete node and insert the expression add dense smaller than 0.5. Now all particles in thin smoke are deleted. And now all particles are gone. I think we need a smaller value here. As you can see, the particles are going through the ground plane just like the smoke did. So we need to add a collider here as well. This time we can use the Collide Classic node. This will let us use a classic collider in the node graph. At the end of the chain, we make the particles static again with an end dynamic node. And add again a write node set to stitch alembic. Now we are more or less finished, but we add another set attribute node to define the sizes of the particles. Just like last time, we write the expression remap add rand add petinum in brackets both, comma 0.1, comma 0. And so on. I think this time we should choose a slightly smaller value, so maybe 0.0025 and 0.0025. So we get really small particles. Okay, we save the scene activate the write node and hit simulate. And here you can see the play blast. Now we have all our caches and can render the whole thing. We start in Octane standalone to prepare our proxies we can later use in Modo. With a right click and a click on import, we can load our VDB cache. We want to load it as a fog volume and also create a geometry output. This is necessary to use it as a proxy. At the moment, this is only one file. To load the whole sequence, we have to click on this movie icon. Now we can select all the files and click Open. We can quickly check if every frame is there. Okay, that looks good. If we want to have a look if everything works as expected, we can connect a render target. Okay, Octane is rendering. That is not really pretty at the moment, so we set the render kernel to path tracing and reduce the density and the step length in the volume material. So this is already way better. Okay. And the cool thing is, motion blur is just working fine. Now we delete the render target and save the whole thing. Now we can delete the VDB cache and load our high-risk grain particles. We can now connect this one with the geometry out node. Now we just add a diffuse material and create once again a render target to have a look if everything is working as expected. And as we can see, everything works, even with motion blur. Okay, once again we delete the render target and save this as our high-risk particle proxy. Now we repeat the whole process and delete the particle cache and load the swirling smoke particles. Once again checking with the render target, and yes, this looks nice and motion blur is working too. Okay, we save this too as our third proxy and are done. Now we switch to Modo to set up our scene. As a first step, we create a VDB voxel item and load our VDB cache. In the options, we activate Generate Mesh. And now we try to find a nice frame, something we can use as our stand-in model. Next, we create a new empty mesh layer and use a merge mesh MeshOps to convert the VDB voxel mesh to polygons. Freeze the whole thing and delete the VDB item from our scene. Also, we can name our mesh to Smoke Proxy. Now we are looking for the Octane tab and scroll to the Proxy section. Now we select our Smoke Proxy and click Open. Now we repeat this process to load our other two proxies. So now we head over to the Octane tab, and we can already see that this is way too big. But we leave it like that for the moment and just have a look if the proxies are working correctly. So we just start Octane and we can see all the proxies are working and all of them are rendering with motion blur. Great. Of course this is way too big, but now we can build our scene. First of all, we can scale down the proxies. Next we try to find a nice camera angle and can also set up a background. For this I use a cube MeshOps. Set it to 0 on Y to get a plane, scale it bigger, and add some segments. We now can add a bend deformer to make a nice studio background. We set the bend to 90 degrees and use a transform to rotate and position it in the scene. Okay. Now we can also add a material tag. In the next step, we select our proxies and the camera, set the action center to origin and rotate the whole thing so that the camera is perpendicular to the background. Okay, next thing would be to set up some lights. I create one area light for the smoke and another one for the background. Next, we open the schematic and create a new workspace for our lights. After that, we can add our two area lights and add the Octane distribution channels to the nodes. So now we can again head over to the Octane tab to add also two spotlight textures to the schematic. We connect these to the distribution slots. We select both nodes and set the mode to surface normal and leave the other settings as they are. Next, we turn our environment power way down to get a real dark scene. Now we can make a material for the background. Let's select a really dark bluish color. And now we are already done and ready to save the scene. Okay, now we start the rendering and see immediately that there are some things to do. So first of all, we need more light at the front, and I can't really see the smoke. And I also don't like the general scale. So I just make the whole thing a bit bigger and adjust the camera. And we also need to adjust the lights as well. At this point, we can fine-tune the position of our proxies so that they don't float above the ground. And we can also make our background light a bit brighter. I think it's best to turn everything off and concentrate on the lights on the background. One thing which helps with rendering speed is to enable the quad light option. And I don't want to have the reflection on the background, so I just disable the specular visibility of the light. Now we can tune the spotlight texture to get a nice spotlight effect. Maybe it's good to make the band a bit larger. Okay, that's better. Okay, now we save the scene and have a look at our other light. We try to make it a bit softer. I think that looks fine for now. Maybe a bit too bright, so we turn that a bit down again. And now I'm going to disable our particle proxies to have a better look at our smoke. As you can see, there's not much going on. So we can open our smoke proxy and change some of the settings. First of all, we add some scattering and increase the density. We click on Save Proxy, and after a reload we can see that our flower appears. Maybe it's even a bit too strong, so we decrease the density and save the proxy again. Now we enable the other proxies again and are ready to render the animation. And here is the final result. And here another version with a bit of heat in the smoke sim. Hi there.
Okay, there we go. Sorry, you guys got a brief glimpse of Nicole hiding behind the background. So the wizard behind the curtain, almost literally. All right. Well, that was an amazing, amazing, amazing demo, Leonard. Can't thank you enough for doing it. Wow. That's like one of the things we were talking about behind the scenes is your skill with lighting. So did working in a real photo studio help you with your lighting skills? Because your lighting is really elegant.
Yes, I think so. Yeah.
It
Yeah,
you know,
and
it
I'm
is
doing that a lot, so maybe there are some skills there.
I think there are, and I sympathize with you're like, oh, I think so, because I worked at a photo studio as well before I came to Foundry, and you glean a lot from the photographers that you work with and how they light things, and it's a totally different approach, of course, but you do pick these things up, but you don't realize you do, and so I guess I'm trying to tell you, you're really good at lighting and really good at making attractive, elegant lighting.
Thank you.
Okay, so questions. First off, we have one question. I don't know if we have more than that right now. But so there's a question about, is Storm a part of Moto? No, Storm is a plugin that can be used along with Moto. And as you saw in the demo, you can go ahead and basically do a simulation with Storm. You can bring that into Octane standalone. You then can use that to basically set up your sim, right? Or your render, bring it into Moto, and then leverage that and start tweaking that. Is that accurate?
Yes, Storm is a standalone app and no plugin for Modo. Just get that right.
Yeah, no, exactly. Just that was one of the only questions that has popped up so far. But yeah, I think this was just an incredible demonstration. And you'd even brought up, you're like, I don't know if I'm speaking well or not. Your speaking is amazing. Your pacing for tutorials is phenomenal. You're very clear, you're very direct, and you're very concise. So I think more people are going to want more tutorials from you after this.
Yeah, it only took me 3 days to do it.
Did it really only take you 3 days? Okay,
Yes.
that's actually okay. Are you saying it only took you 3 days because you're like, wow, it was a long time? Or, from my perspective, it's like, wow, that really only took you 3 days.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't thought that doing these tutorials is so hard.
They are extremely hard. If you did that tutorial in 3 days, that's impressive. So you're a bit of a prodigy there with tutorials. Then my experience with making tutorials, especially the first ones that I made, was not 3 days for 40 minutes. That was that clear and that understandable. And so I think that was absolutely phenomenal. All right, Paulo de Almeida says, awesome. That is possible only with Octane? What are your thoughts there, Leonard?
You can do a lot in Modo alone. You can load VDB and render them. You can load the particle caches and render them. There are some limitations. I think you need a replicator to render the particles. And I found it's getting quite slow if you do that with 1.5 million particles. But other than that, that's also doable in Modo alone.
Yeah, it's possible. You could set up a volume item. There's a lot of ways you can handle that volume item. You could have mesh items that determine the volume of the volumetric item, right? And have them fill in that way and replace it. But yeah, it would not be nearly as fast as and controllable as the workflow that Leonard just showed, as far as going from Storm to Octane to Modo using Octane. And so it's a very efficient workflow without question. All right, we got kind of the same question. Is the Octane thing just a choice, or is that mandatory? It's a choice, but it's a good choice. Octane is for Octane, the Octane plugin and Octane standalone for Modo. I believe it's around 200 USD. It's a pretty good deal, and they've got a fantastic render network as well. So we got a nerdy question for you from Steve Hill. Nerdy question for Leonard: what is your hardware platform?
I have old Threadripper, the first generation, and one 4090 NVIDIA card and a 3090 as well. So 2 powerful GPUs and a less powerful CPU.
Fair enough. Well, okay, so a first gen Threadripper?
Yes.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, they just came out with the 96 core one, I think, this week, which is just mayhem. It's like $5,000. We should introduce you to AMD, because it sounds like you can actually show off amazing hardware like that.
Yeah.
So Leonard has great hardware, but I would say that's not outrageous hardware. If you told me you had the brand new Threadripper, that's $5,000. That's like, okay, you got something special. But 3090s, 4090s, those are high-end graphics card, first-gen Threadripper. The modern Ryzens are definitely on par with that first-gen Threadripper. I have a 5950X, which is 16 threads, I believe, or 16 cores, 32 threads. And it's amazing. I love AMD's CPUs, and my 3090 is wonderful. I'm jealous of your 4090 because of DLSS and the advanced DLSS.
Yeah, I have to add that I did all the Storm stuff on an M1 laptop. So
really?
That part is another machine.
Impressive. Okay, and so all the actual particle simulation stuff was done on a mobile M1 CPU, or?
Yes.
Okay, and there's a successor now, the M2, which is more powerful. So that speaks volumes. And by the way, guys, as far as Moto support for Mac ARM-based systems, that will be coming out with 17.0. So when you guys have your hands on the alpha beta in the middle of November, you're going to be, if you have a Mac ARM system, you'll be able to actually start using that and start testing that for us. We are seeing pretty significant performance improvements of about 50 to 100%. Storm is just Storm. Is that built for ARM as well, or?
No, but it has CUDA modes, so you can run the grain sims and the SPH sims with CUDA acceleration, and that gives a lot of speed boost.
I bet. I bet. Okay, awesome. Very cool. Well, do you have any plans for future tutorials? Because I just like your presentation style. And, I'd like to see more tutorials from people like you.
Yes, I started a while ago to do Storm tutorials on YouTube, and I want to continue them. And I'm also doing these random setups, and I figured it would be cool if there was not only the file people can look at, but also a tutorial to know how the scenes are put together. That's definitely a plan for the future.
Heck yes. All right, man. Well, we need to make sure we get you, on our Moto Heroes group. A bunch of people are working on a bunch of different things that I think you could actually help them out with simulation wise, or, inform them on simulation wise, because we have a lot of content we want to produce for 17.0. And these artists are helping us out. People like Jan, people like Chemo and Will and Mateo Szlasinski, and all these people making amazing things. I think your knowledge would help a lot there. I'd love to have you in there.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Leonard. That was a fantastic presentation. Last thing to update you guys on is our future live streams, right? And so the next live stream will be held on November 17th, and that will be a roadmap live stream. And so we'll be letting you know what to expect for 17.0, and also letting you know our plans for next year. Definitely the early part of the year, but we'll, kind of give you some idea what we want to even target in the later part of the year. So I'm sure you guys are very excited about that. And we're kind of targeting that week around for the public beta so that you guys can start testing it for us. And there'll be enough time for you to test it and us to act on your feedback. And that's been one of our big goals. We've made a lot of changes to how Moto's developed. And even this new approach to our live streams is a part of how we're changing things for Moto behind the scenes. And so you guys will start seeing greater social media interaction and these wonderful, much more polished live streams aided by Nicole. So thank you so much, Leonard, for joining us today. And thank you, Nicole, for the help on this live stream. And see you guys in a couple weeks.